This is Halo Reach, roughly a year and a half into development. But originally, this wasn't what Bungie had in mind when working on their last Halo game. Originally, Bungie were exploring the idea of making a direct sequel to Halo 3, where Master Chief would have woken up from his cryopod. But this was scrapped pretty early on, because they couldn't figure out how to do it in a way that would be satisfying or be a one-game event to complete their Microsoft contract. As we know, Bungie would splinter off after shipping Halo Reach and lose the IP to Microsoft. They knew that going into this game, this would be their last chance to work on a Halo game ever again. So in traditional old school Bungie fashion, they went out with a bang. Following the release of Halo 3, Bungie announced its split from Microsoft. The high-level details of the split included Bungie regaining its independence, but having to give up the Halo IP to Microsoft. Additionally, they would have to create 2 more entries into the franchise before being allowed to split. With that in mind, we know that one of the games in the contract would become Halo 3 ODST, but before production on Halo Reach started, Bungie created an internal team to work on Peter Jackson's planned Halo game, Halo Chronicles, which would have been the last game that Bungie would be contracted to make. This game was originally supposed to be the second game in the contract, but it was eventually cancelled and the teams begun working on the initial concepts of what their final Halo game would be. Originally, Bungie was exploring the idea of creating Halo 4 as a direct sequel to Halo 3. Bungie outlined some ideas, but felt boxed in by expectations and the narrative constraints. They didn't think that they would be able to tell a full story within the constraints of just one game, so they moved on to their next concept. A self-contained prequel is what they arrived at, one that would amplify the gravity of the events that occurred in Halo Combat Evolved, and what they arrived to was the concept of Halo Reach, a somber recollection of the events that would highlight the absolute unstoppable force that humanity was about to face. Led by longtime Halo veteran Marcus Leto, he was tasked with leading creative vision on the game. As creative director and project lead, he oversaw everything from campaign to multiplayer, forge, and firefight. And for those who don't know who Marcus Leto is, he's practically the father of ensuring Halo looked like Halo. He was the art director on every single Halo game up to this point, and now he'd finally be able to spearhead his own masterpiece, alongside the incredible team of 250 people who would join him. To save time in production, the original plan for the team was to carry over the existing assets from Halo 3, and add a few new polygons here and there and rework some textures to bring them up to the Reach bar. And that's where this footage you're seeing is from. Early prototypes of Halo Reach from roughly 2008 included a ton of things that Bungie wanted to do in Halo 3, but couldn't due to time constraints, including, of course, space battles. But Bungie ran into a problem pretty early on. The engine had to evolve a little bit in order to support the vision that they were aiming for. They spent some time revamping how the Blam engine worked, allowing for higher quality textures, more volumetric effects, and performance optimizations. But also, they were of course able to retain full support for co-op across the entire campaign, something that we would unfortunately lose in more recent Halo entries. Storyboards were also made to highlight key parts of the story, and at the same time as the engine upgrades were happening, the story and narrative teams were hard at work at crafting the adventure they wanted to tell with Reach. Marcus and the teams at Bungie would start development of Halo Reach by really emphasizing the true hopelessness that was Reach. Marcus wanted players to know from the very beginning that Reach was doomed, and that it would eventually fall. Him and the team at Bungie wanted to craft a world that had this hopelessness element, but also one that is a living, breathing world that let the players be invested in the planet and the people, but also be impacted by the outcome. The first year of development focused on a core group establishing core gameplay principles, while the rest of the team joined later to actually build the game. Marcus laid out his original plan for what Halo Reach would be. In a couple of high-level sticky notes, he would lay out every single mission and what the direction of that mission should be. Of course, one of the missions in his original plan was the boat level. This level ultimately got cut from the game and didn't make it past the initial prototype phase. These stickies also included notes on key story details that would then be passed over to level designers, so they can put their own unique charm on telling the story. One thing that was pretty different from what we're so used to with modern game development is the creative freedom in a AAA setting. Marty O'Donnell, who was the composer for the soundtrack for every Halo game prior to Halo Reach, stated that all of the creative directors at Bungie had full control over their respective fields. For Marty, him and the audio teams would have full control over how the game sounded. No amount of influence from the publisher or internal folks at Bungie could have forced him to change any parts of the game that he didn't personally agree with. This is just an example for audio and sound design, but the same remained true across the entire suite of directors, all the way up to Marcus Leto. The teams knew Halo and were able to dictate exactly what they wanted with no outside influences. With that being said, development on Halo Reach would continue throughout 2008, where a lot of art and mechanics were being built. The game was starting to come together, so Bungie decided to put together a short teaser trailer to help drum up fan excitement.
Another team at Bungie has been hard at work on a top secret project, and today, I'd like to show you what they've been up to.
Bungie revealed Halo Reach to the world in E3 of 2009 with a short teaser trailer. While Joseph Staten was leading charge on Halo 3 ODST, which would release just a couple of months after E3, he would also help reveal Halo Reach to the world. Fans wouldn't have to wait long for another Halo experience, as Halo 3 ODST launched just a few months later. Bungie would bundle in an invitation to the Halo Reach beta, which would occur in May of 2010. While this video isn't about ODST, it's worth noting that Joseph Staten and his small team delivered a Halo game with a distinctly different tone, one that proved a spin-off could still feel meaningful and impactful. This helped open the door for fans to embrace the idea of spin-off titles that could stand toe-in-toe with mainline entry games, setting the stage for the excitement that would surround Halo Reach. The release of Halo 3 ODST was important to Bungie. Not only did it allow for fans to have a positive mindset towards a non-Master Chief Halo story, but it also brought the contract required by Microsoft down to just one game. After that, they'd be able to set their own course for the future, but as a byproduct, leaving Halo behind. They had to give this game, their last Halo game ever, everything they possibly could. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Halo Reach's development, consider subscribing. This channel is still growing and it would mean a lot to me if you took a second to subscribe and like this video. With that, let's continue with While the reveal was happening, behind the scenes, Marcus Leto and his team were still full speed ahead on the development of their last Halo game. At this point, the game was internally in a good spot, but there were still some things that they had to cut out of the game due to a lack of time. On the campaign front, they cut one mission from the final version of the game, excluding the boat prototype level. The name of the mission and what the story of the mission is unknown, but it was originally supposed to be in between Tip of the Spear and Long Night of Solace. On the multiplayer side, a lot of the maps were pretty much set in stone. Bungie would end up creating one map pack post-release before handing the reins to Certain Affinity. However, there were still a fair amount of multiplayer maps that were cut, including a non-Forge remake of the map Ascension from Halo 2, a non-Forge remake of Blood Gulch from Combat Evolved, and a couple more original map concepts that never made it out of the prototype phase. They also had a fair amount of unused armor abilities too, one of which was the Repulsor armor ability. I don't have any footage of this, but I can't help but think of the Repulsor from Halo Infinite here. Even in Halo Infinite, which had its own issues to be fair, the Repulsor felt like a Bungie era sandbox edition that built upon the force of a gravity hammer. But despite these cuts due to a lack of time, Development otherwise was shaping up to be a pretty smooth experience. The staff didn't experience massive levels of crunch or burden to shape the game into a vision they didn't agree with. Everybody was on the same page. They would continue to iterate upon the game throughout 2009, and by early 2010, they had a small playable slice of the game that would eventually become the Halo Reach beta.
Who needs modern warfare when you have Reach? Reach beta, the arena, flying around with jetpacks, no scopes, barrel rolls, capturing the flag.
Excitement for the Halo Reach beta was reaching an all-time high, as you can tell. Bungie began closing out development on a small slice of multiplayer that would act as a testbed for their server. This build of Halo Reach is from February of 2010, which is roughly 3 months away from the beta. At this point, all that remained was final polish on the game and to clean up some temporary leftover assets from Halo 3. The beta was a very important milestone internally at Bungie. Since multiplayer at the time was very different than Halo 3's, they were a bit nervous to reveal the drastic changes. And as expected, fan reception to the new loadout system and armor abilities were mixed, to say the least. Before the beta's official release in May, Bungie would publish a vidoc that went over the different abilities and weapons that would be available in the beta. But regardless of what people think of multiplayer, the beta would be a very important part of the development of Halo Reach. They were able to tune the gameplay a bit according to player feedback. Things like reducing grenade damage, melee bleed through, reticle bloom behavior, although still controversial in the final game, and armor lock's duration and effectiveness. Again, still a little bit controversial in the final game. After the beta ended, however, Bungie had one final bombshell to drop onto the community.
It was so beyond our production capability. We were just like, that's crazy. We can't do that. I couldn't stop the artist who started creating it.
The first time I looked at Forge World, and I was like, oh, hey, cool, oh, holy, you guys did what?
Bungie would reveal the final pillar of Halo Reach, the new Forge system, and more specifically, Forge World. Forge World began development as a remake of the Halo 3 Forge map sandbox, set in an under-construction skyscraper in the city of New Alexandria. As the fixed and phased item settings were greenlit for development, the developers realized they didn't need to ship a flat terrain like Foundry or Sandbox, as players would be able to create their own Forge maps wherever they wanted to. Bungie also knew that they wanted to create 5 multiplayer maps, but only had time for the art team to create 1 sandbox, and a limited palette of items to put into the maps. Because of this, the original intention was to build 5 different terrains: a spire, a cliff, a gulch, a canyon, and a room, all set under the same skybox, with hints of the other 4 maps further away, such as being able to see the canyon that looked like the gulch from the quarry. And to aid in development, designer Steve Cotton had an internal build of a level that featured all 5 maps compiled into one level to allow him to work on each level faster. Upon realizing that the map actually ran pretty well and looked good when compiled, Cotton pitched the idea to the team at Bungie, who advised him against it. Cotton did it anyways. And after the 5 original maps were combined to create Forge World, 4 new areas were added to the maps between them, giving Forge World a total of 9 different regions and making it the then largest multiplayer map in the series. As development was wrapping up, Bungie began to wind down, and as the split from Microsoft was coming up, they began sharing all their assets and tools that they used to make their games for the past decade with Microsoft, including the Blam engine and the finalized source code for Halo Reach. Journey was reaching the finish line.
Goran Reljan Jurekovic, who says, is there going to be a sequel that takes place right after Halo 3? Again, still hungry for more, even though Halo Reach isn't even out yet.
I know, no rest for the weary, huh? Well, if there is, who knows? Bungie won't be involved with it. Reach is certainly our final game, but clearly Halo's popular. There's a great fan base for it, a lot of passion behind it.
Reach would officially release in September of 2010, and as we all know, the campaign was perceived by an overwhelming majority of Halo fans to be among the best in the franchise. The theme of an unrelenting force taking over with humanity outmatched, outgunned, and ultimately doomed set the stage for a tone unlike anything in prior entries. And amidst the chaos and defeat, the player's final objective, getting Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn, became one of the most crucial moments in Halo, as it was the direct handoff that would lead to the events of Halo Combat Evolved. The multiplayer side would be perceived mostly with praise, although I do think that the Bloom and Armor Lock discussions were warranted. It definitely didn't diminish my own enjoyment of the game, and the community of Halo Reach became one of the biggest communities in the world. I would be so excited every week to watch Rooster Teeth's weekly Fails of the Week franchise, or see what the latest Machinima videos were. The inclusion of Forge World alone dramatically increased the longevity of Halo Reach. Players loved being able to join custom games and just fling around their friends with the grid. Additionally, Forge would also catapult multiple different online video series, like Achievement Horse from Rooster Teeth, into the stratosphere. This was Bungie's last entry into the Halo franchise, and I think they made a perfect prequel. And I'm happy to report that even the developers think this was one of the best video game creations as well. Marcus Leto, who worked on every Halo game at Bungie, stated this too. All that remained now was Bungie's future endeavors.
Reach was just perfect. It was the perfect fit for all of the ideas that we were talking about in the early days.
After the release of Halo Reach, Bungie finally had the ability to chart their own destiny going forward. Microsoft would form 343 Industries and have some of the employees from Bungie join them in continuing Halo. Bungie itself would retain most of their workforce when they went independent. Marcus Leto would depart Bungie in 2011 to pursue a career in indie game development. He would return some months later before leaving again for good in 2012. He would spend the better part of the next decade mentoring students at the DigiPen Institute of Technology, where aspiring game developers would look to him for advice. In October of 2021, he would rejoin the world of AAA development when he became the studio head for EA's new Battlefield games narrative campaign at Ridgeline Games. But after a couple of years of working on the franchise, the studio would be shut down by EA and Marcus would depart shortly after. Marty O'Donnell was fired from Bungie in April of 2014 after a series of disputes, particularly regarding creative control over the music for the game Destiny. When the gameplay reveal trailer for Destiny debuted in 2013, Marty was frustrated to find publisher Activision had pulled his original music from the trailer in favor of their own tracks. Nowadays, Bungie isn't the same studio that brought us Halo Reach. I wouldn't even consider it a shell of its former self, but an entirely different studio with the same name. The studio has gone through drastic changes, and a majority of the incredible people that brought us Reach aren't at the studio anymore. And for those that remain, a lot of the direction that leaders at Bungie are pushing for are prioritizing monetization over the game itself, and as we know, that's a recipe for disaster. The same charm that they presented in these old vidocs highlights the difference in what Bungie used to stand for.
We have this opportunity to look at the entire franchise, and we were like, okay, it's now our time to close out Bungie's contribution to the Halo universe. How are we going to do that in a way that does justice to this big thing that we created?
I was more proud of Reach than I was of like any game I've ever worked on.
And ultimately leading to something like Halo Reach that to me was all of the right things put together. Like that was a great way to end the Halo series. That was the perfect way to do it.